Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and for joining us at this session, which is called the Musicians Toolkit. My name is Sarah Osborn and I'm Head of Business Development here at the ISM, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming you to this session. We've heard a lot earlier on in the day about the adaptability and resilience of musicians, their creativity, and just how they've contended with lockdown and everything else that the world has been dealing with this year. Over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to be looking at how we can take some of those ideas forward and look at the practical considerations that sit around them. And I'm delighted that I've got a fantastic panel joining me, and I really encourage you to dig into their expertise and knowledge and join us as we uncover and discover what musicians need to be doing over the next year or so to really ensure that their careers flourish. As you know, I hope you've all had a chance to type a question. Please do get involved. The hashtag, as you will no doubt know by now, is Empowered Musician. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panelists who are joining us this afternoon. So here they are, aren't they a friendly bunch, saying hello to you all. So I will ask them to briefly introduce themselves. We've got a lot of musicians on the panel, so even some of the ISM staff team. We are also musicians ourselves, so we'll give you a little bit of a flavour as to who we are and what we do. First of all, though, if I could ask David, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, so I'm David Taylor. I'm probably best described with the great catch-all term of being an arts entrepreneur. And what I also do is consult for arts organisations and individuals on how to market and promote themselves, particularly focusing around digital. My background is that I'm a cellist, and I ended up creating my own organisation called Yorkshire Sinfonia back in 2014-15. And from there, became fascinated about the journey of being an entrepreneur as a musician, and also why we as an industry and a sector, particularly in classical music, aren't necessarily as entrepreneurial as other parts of the world. And we certainly don't get taught how to be entrepreneurial. So I've become really fascinated about that. And now I do talking at various places and workshops around entrepreneurship in music. And as you can probably tell already, won't shut up about it. But that's me in a nutshell. And I'm really, really fascinated to hear some of your thoughts and questions. So please do fire them away in the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. And next, if we can go over to Max, who works for Crowdfunder.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Max Upton. I work at Crowdfunder. We're a rewards-based crowdfunding platform based in the UK. I've worked and seen many musician-style projects go live on Crowdfunder over the last few years since I've been working here. In all aspects of the industry, from musicians through to behind the scenes stuff, through to music venues. All in all, things surrounding the music industry tend to do pretty well on Crowdfunder. So hopefully I can give you a bit of insight into how to practically do that for yourselves as musicians in our chat. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next up, if we could ask Kathryn, introduce you.
Hello there, everybody. I'm Kathryn. So before March, I was a gigging flute player working predominantly in contemporary, experimental and orchestral performance. But during lockdown, I ran out of excuses to finish writing up my PhD, which is all about breathing and how breath is treated as invisible in music performance and in society. I couldn't have ever predicted that at the time of writing, breath, aerosols and droplets would suddenly become the obsession of the world. So this actually led me to co-write the ISM's Global Literature Reviews, which bring together the most recent scientific research about transmission, as well as bringing together the various guidance for the performance and education spaces. But now I'm focused on all things Brexit to help musicians from the UK and Europe prepare for the changes that are coming quite soon.
Thank you. And it's a subject we'll be coming back to later on this afternoon, as there is a lot that we have to get our heads around ahead of January. So next, if I could go over to John.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. My name is John Robinson. I'm the head of compliance and legal at the ISM. Under my remit comes our legal department, who have been coping so magnificently with the many hundreds, if not thousands, of queries that we've had as a result of the COVID epidemic. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the issues that may arise out of all of this, and I'm looking forward to your questions, and we'll try and take as many as we can. My background really, I've been lucky enough to have worked in membership organisations for creative people for 35 years. I worked at Equity, the Performers Union, for a long time, looking after the opera and ballet companies. I've worked at the ISM now for a total of about 7 years in various legal capacities. And I was also a musician and writer before I got into all of this stuff, and I'm still an amateur player now. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you as we go through this. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And last but not least, Ruth.
Hi everyone, my name's Ruth McPherson. I'm Senior Partnerships and Marketing Manager for the ISM. So I work as part of the marketing team, and we work together to promote all the fantastic work that we do at the ISM, including campaigning, events like this one, resources, guidance, advice, promoting all of that to the music profession, to individual musicians and to music sector professionals. And before I worked at the ISM, I worked for Rheingold Publishing, a music magazine publisher, on a variety of different titles. And I'm originally from Scotland, so I grew up very much in the folk music tradition, and I'm an amateur clarsach player, which is the Scottish harp.
Brilliant, thank you. So I hope you can see from that we've got a lot of experience here, and so, as I say, please do make use of it and ask your questions. To kick off with, I'm going to go to David, because we had a lot in the earlier sessions throughout the day around adaptability, entrepreneurship, resilience. Sort of how are musicians earning money at the moment? Where are they finding their work?
So there's been plenty of things that musicians have been rolling up their sleeves and doing throughout a whole spectrum of different things, which is really fascinating to see where people come up with. So either they're split into two things, one being replicating something that is live, or two is doing something completely unique and different. And for me, something that's really beneficial that's for going forward in life post-COVID is identifying how to have multiple income streams. Some of them are big, some of them are small, and some you'll invest more energy in and some you won't. But having lots of different things you can fall back on, or just continue to tick over, or potentially identify additional revenue streams that you haven't thought of but are there for the taking, it's going to have real long-term impact for, say, for example, if you have illness or maternity leave, or want to take a break from things for various different reasons, or just happen to be having a slower time with work than normal. So for me, it's really fascinating to see that this is now something we can look at. So the two main ones during the last sort of 9 months have been people transferring their teaching to being online teaching, which is a traditional version of just taking something that's live and making it online. We've also been seeing people do digital performances, and it's great to see that now becoming more of a thing. So not just doing a digital concert, but also having one with donations, potentially doing them on ticketed services. So previously it was something like Eventbrite, where you would then have a video call as the digital conferencing thing. On the plus side, there's now platforms like Tides, which is TIDZE, which is a platform where you can actually set up your own streaming service or have your own individual live stream concerts and sell tickets for those. And also then that's then backed up by consumer technology being absolutely fantastic now that we can do these sort of things. Then carrying on from there, we've also seen people do a whole world of different things around either Patreon or Ko-fi, which is spelled KO-FI, around having subscriptions and supporting people. And then in addition, various fundraising and other things. What I think is really fascinating is to look at what you can do on top of this to potentially find new, unique ways of generating income. So for example, one thing that I'd really recommend you doing if you are in the teaching world in any way, shape or form is to investigate something called Amazon affiliate links. And what this is a system on Amazon where if you send a link to a product, you get an element of commission either for that product or for something else if they go on to buy something different. So this may seem something quite surreal, but hypothetically, if you have plenty of musicians, they will be doing grades, they will be needing books, they will be needing strings, all these different bits of equipment. And realistically, you're going to be telling your students to go and purchase these items anyway. So you may as well send them a link where they can purchase it. It comes to them in the post and you get a small commission off the back of it. And this is one of those things that doesn't seem like it's that much, and it's only 5 or 10%, but will really start to build up if you have 20, 30 students. So instantly that can be something that can potentially add to your stream as well. Moving on from there, I think it's realizing as well that you have this whole body of knowledge with you. As musicians, we tend to forget that we have all this incredible expertise, and the potential to share it is huge. So for example, again, there's Amazon self-publishing if you want to write books. There's other platforms for doing that as well, for creating various resources. I know some people who've also then gone on to do that in terms of making their own pedagogy and ways around teaching. It could also be something completely different and writing children's books that are musical. There's a whole world there for you to explore depending on what your passions are. And again, that can be something that can sit there alongside your ongoing output going forwards. Then from there, if you're wanting to, say, for example, try and monetize your performances in a longer term format, you can then create recordings. And again, this is where consumer technology has been fantastic, and your phones are actually quite good, or you can get microphones that are even better relatively cheaply. So services like Bandcamp, where you can sell digital downloads, are really fantastic. And especially when compared to streaming services, where the volume you'd need on, say, Spotify to make £1 is quite significant. But something on Bandcamp where you get 85% of the download cost is really quite incredible. And then from there, there's a whole other world of things you can actually do around just experimenting and thinking outside of the box. So with Christmas coming up, I know various musicians who are creating bespoke musical postcards to people on request, where your customers can commission you to go out and generate art. There's so many potential things that you can do around that, and just try and think of some unique ways of doing things. But on the plus side, we have everything set up here to help you now in this modern day society. So the phone in your pocket is now pretty much as good as some TV cameras. We have all the online payment services like PayPal or Stripe. Websites are really quite easy to set up now with things like Squarespace or Wix. There's so many resources and free apps that can potentially help you get you on your way. It's just one of these tricky things of working out where your talents and your interests lie, and starting to then build up from there in terms of what you can do to help give you these different multiple pillars that can hopefully help support you in the long term.
Brilliant, thank you, David. I mean, there's just so much in there that I want to come back to and explore further with you. And you know, in a way, I'll be guided by the audience as to where they want to take the conversation. But one thing I'm very intrigued by is your comment that it's thinking about ways that you can transfer what you used to do and think about how that works now, but also looking at the new income streams. So I guess my question out of that is, sort of, is online the solution? You know, are there still ways that you can work offline? Because not everyone is confident using tech, and sort of how do you balance what should be online and what can be offline?
Certainly. Initially, my main advice for when things are completely removed and we're having to do things in lockdown is to do things where it is transferring your existing output to being online. The most simple one for that tends to be teaching. We found that performances can be a bit trickier, but with things like Tides, for example, that I mentioned earlier, that then does make performing concerts online significantly easier, and you don't have to be technologically savvy to do those sort of things now, which is a benefit. It seems quite surreal, but I always really suggest Googling things, because if you're having a problem, I guarantee someone else will have done it and will have written a blog about it, because that's the world we now live in. There's so many how-to guides that are out there that can really help and support you. With things that are potentially offline, there are still ways that you can do them as well. So say, for example, if it's musical arranging, that's a service you can still offer offline as well. The same with compositions, the same potentially with editing as well, if you're into audio editing or editing CDs, etc. So there's still plenty you can do behind the scenes that isn't necessarily the outward going out there digital. And I think one thing that's always a fear is that everyone then feels they need to go on every single platform at once and tell the world absolutely everything on YouTube and Facebook and Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram and everything. But for me, even though there are benefits to being everywhere, starting off with the one that you enjoy and the one that you enjoy doing as well. So say, for example, there's someone I was coaching recently who wanted to be on YouTube because that's all she'd heard about. But realistically, when we went through sort of an analysis of the things she loved doing in life, she loved writing. So therefore, going around and doing a blog was something that's more beneficial to her, and she therefore didn't have to have the worry of having to create a YouTube channel. So for me, sticking to things where you love the actual process, the interest that you have initially, that's going to help get you set up online. But the benefits are that things are now really quite simple, where there is support available, even where it might not seem that in the very instance.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I do think the whole idea of how you diversify your portfolio, it's a phrase that could be bandied around very easily, but as you say, it's very much around looking at what your interests are and what your strengths are. And maybe actually I could bring in Kathryn again at this point as a fantastic example of someone who, 9 months ago, her diary is probably filled with concerts and gigs and things, and now her portfolio looks very different. So how have you found that transition, and sort of how did you come to decide that was the thing you were going to do?
That what was the thing I was going to do?
Sorry, move away from performing move into finish your PhD and all these other things you've been working on.
Well, of course, I suppose there wasn't really a whole lot of a choice. I think that research-wise, I mean, I'd obviously embarked on a PhD because I'm fascinated with performance, and it was completely related to my own solo projects, which actually helped me recover from respiratory problems that interfered with my ability to even be a professional flute player. So it all sort of tied hand in hand. I had no idea how I was going to juggle full-time freelancing with this full-time PhD, and to be honest, it was really, really hard. It was, I have to admit, there was quite a long period of being a downer of not really wanting to research anything and not really wanting to play to anybody. But I think it was necessary because I don't know, maybe I took enough time out and I was able to sort of start to look around a little bit more. And I think there's something that's really cathartic about just reading other people's research. So the timing worked out really well when the ISM put this call out for a researcher to research COVID transmission, and when Deborah sort of interviewed me for it, she didn't really know what the research would look like, but then it just testament to, I think, her forward planning. They had no idea what was out there research wise, and it's turned out to be this incredible document. So I think getting my head stuck right into something and just trying to find out what it was helped me, and now I'm researching everything every day. I think there's some kind of logic to it, just digging around trying to find out a new skill. And earlier Anita Collins's talk was about the sort of the dip that the brain has when you're not learning anything new. And I think that I found that really healthy for me, is just to try and learn some new skills that weren't necessarily about the flute.
Interesting, thank you. And I think my follow-up question for that is back to David, but how do you advise musicians to plan for the short, medium and long term at the moment when so much is up in the air?
It's a tricky one, but I'd almost flip it round the other way. So what is there that you need to do urgently? So it's not that you're planning short term, it's trying to work out where the thing that's going to make the biggest impact as soon as possible. So I think that's why a lot of people went to teaching straight away, because it was what was bringing in most money for quite a lot of musicians, but also what was the thing that we could do immediately. So I think initially trying to work out what you need to survive in terms of the money, and then also what's going to be the easiest thing to transfer doing, either transferring to doing offline in a different way or doing it online in a different way. And then from there, start to try and identify what skills and resources you have, what opportunities potentially are out there, just as we were hearing. And then from there, start to make a plan of what you're going to be able to do initially earliest. And almost, it's a horrible phrase, but there's something called a SWOT analysis, where it's strengths, weaknesses, and various bits. And it's analyzing where you think your skill set is necessarily, where you think you're going to be able to make money, what is the long-term thing that's going to be potentially more weaker than others. So for example, live performance at the moment is something that I think would be pushing back into the long term, because you can't also plan with certainty when they're going to be. And trying to identify that sort of level of priority and level of certainty that you can do with projects. So what can I do now? What's definitely going to bring money in, and what is going to be predictable? I think they're the most instant things. And then once you have those things in place, then starting to identify what you can start to add to this on top of it without taking significant amounts of resources, either financially or in terms of energy and the workload you have. So what can you just start to add on in sort of a piecemeal way it's going to start adding and building things up. And then once you start to build these other additional strands, then you have a nice level of support going forwards.
Fantastic, thank you. I think it's really interesting that in Kathryn's answer, she talked about sort of the skills and the sort of the value in learning something new. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Max, because a lot of people have been investigating and trying out crowdfunding for the first time. So perhaps can you just give us a bit of an overview as to how crowdfunding works and sort of how can musicians make best use of crowdfunding platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think crowdfunding, in essence, is a way of raising some money to deliver a certain project. There's a bit of perhaps a misconception that it's about you need to raise some money because you're in trouble or there's a problem that's happened and you're trying to get some donations in. There are platforms out there to do that, but I think what Crowdfunder does, sort of opposed to some others, is offers rewards-based crowdfunding, and that is giving you the ability to offer something in return for a donation or a pledge. Now, I've seen lots of musicians, raising money over lockdown and before lockdown, and hopefully I'm going to see more coming forward. If it's just raising money to sort of fill a void, and you're just asking for donations, that's not very sustainable. It might help you now, but it's not going to help you in the long term. So what I've seen is lots of projects and musicians doing well is when they're offering something in return to deliver something. I saw a band go live at the start of lockdown, and they ended up raising 50 grand. They were from the Northeast. I think they're quite a well-known band in the area, the Unthanks. They offered a whole range of different things that people could buy into and get on board, from copies of their records, more exclusive test pressings, even posters of live performances over the past year. David mentioned teaching. You could even offer teaching experiences in return for money. A whole vast range of things. Some musicians are even offering live performances once lockdown is over. Some musicians have been doing stuff online and working with live stream platforms. There's some of the live stream things that David mentioned again, selling tickets through Crowdfunder, raising some money through Crowdfunder, and then offering the link to their fans on the day of the show. And ultimately, what they're trying to do is raise a lump sum of money so they can do something. What we often see with the common one with musicians is so they can go away and do a record or make a record. And what crowdfunding does perhaps enables them to raise some of that money up front so they can go away and deliver it. And then in the aftermath, they can offer all their supporters that help them do that the end product, in this case, the record, or it could be a live event. It could be like, we want to put on a show, but it's going to cost us money to do so. It's almost sort of pre-selling those tickets, and something else to make it happen. Something that, I think is quite important in crowdfunding is that you have sort of a clear project aim or clear project goal. I think if you're just trying to raise money, the day-to-day raising of money, that's not really going to work. There are many other ways that you should be doing that. Crowdfunding isn't your one stop to raise all the money you need, but perhaps you might have quite a you might be that record you're trying to do, or it might be something that that new project you're trying to do. I think someone mentioned going into doing stuff for schools and creating. You might have a project which is you're trying to deliver in a school and you want to raise a certain amount of money to do it, or it could be doing some sort of musical lessons for kids. You need to raise some money up front. That could be your project. It costs £3,000. This is what you're trying to do, and you have a clear aim and a target, and you're trying to achieve it over a closed sort of period of time as well. I think that's something important to remember. Set yourself a deadline and work towards it. We're going to be talking about marketing, and I'm sure what comes on about how you market yourself is exactly the same thing as how you'd market a crowdfunder campaign. Exactly the same way that you'd market a concert, or you market a gig. The same principles apply with a crowdfunding campaign. So there's so many similarities. I'm sure we'll talk about in this chat, but it's definitely a great way to raise some money now, perhaps at a time where the other sources of finance are proving difficult.
Yeah, I mean, can I ask you to expand a little bit more on, you know, if you're starting out, I mean, how do you choose whether you're asking for £200 or £2,000, you know, so how do you determine what's a realistic amount of money to have as your target?
I think it ultimately goes back to what you're trying to do. So, you know, I think about what the project in hand is, and work around that, and be honest and open and transparent about what this project you're trying to do and how much it's going to cost. People are only going to fund you and give you their money if they know what that money is going towards. So if I come out and say, I want to go write a record and get it recorded and it's going to cost me 50 grand. Okay, what, give me some, you know, show me, put it down on paper, break down those costs. And I think it's sort of, you know, that's not going to fly. Be realistic with what you're trying to do. Like I said, it's not your only source of income. But what it might do is show sort of public support. You know, you've got your fans on a public-facing fundraiser, crowdfunder. You've got hundreds of your supporters on board. It demonstrates that people care about what you're doing and like what you're doing. It really validates your project. It means that you should go ahead and do this. And maybe, you know, you might then use that and present it in front of other opportunities. You might have that public-facing crowdfunder with all that support, which might encourage perhaps people to give you a platform to perform at or something like that in the future, because it's there. You can show, look, I've successfully raised this much money from all my fans. I'm here, I'm around. So,
just lastly on that, I mean, how does the crowdfunding work in terms of genres? Are there genres that are more successful on crowdfunding? I mean, I know, for example, you've done a project with brass bands. You obviously work with pop groups. Yeah. Obviously, crowdfunder is open to everyone, but do you find that certain projects work better than others?
I think, you know, so, you know, I think that it ultimately comes down that you've got a clear project that you're trying to do. So, you know, I think there's such a benefit of crowdfunding, which is so many different industries and types of projects on the platform succeeding. You know, perhaps the one, you know, there are certain industries that might be more difficult. Apps, people launching apps, I always find them really difficult to crowdfund for some reason. But musicians have got so much that they can do and so much they can leverage to make succeed. You know, I talk about being rewards-based crowdfunding. You can offer so much in return, and you can use it as a platform to get some of what you're doing out there. You know, you can use it as a platform to get your record out there, to make money from your records. You can use it as a platform to maybe diversify, you know, pivot into something else. Like I said, at the start of lockdown, you're not doing any more gigs. What can I do? I'll start selling, you know, every Friday, I'm going to do a live stream. And I'm offering tickets through my crowdfunder at £5. And it's not everything, but it's a little something. It's a way of engaging with your supporters. You know, a crowdfunder campaign, you've got the option, you've got the ability to engage with everyone who's supporting with you. So it really is a short, sharp marketing exercise, and you really be putting yourself out there. First of all, you're working with your own supporters and networks to sort of get that momentum building. But then once that momentum's building, you start to tap into new audiences. People start to take notice. You know, for example, you might start off, you know, I'd encourage you to start off with family and friends. I think we spoke about this before, Sarah. It's like people always want to get their project in front of the Guardian before they've got it in front of, you know, got in front of mum and dad. Start small, work with your local networks, you know, people that do come to see you perform, perhaps friends and family and all this sort of thing. Have a bit of a plan in place and then start bridging out. Once you've got that momentum, once you've got a bit of money on the board, people will start, you know, turning heads and look at it, and maybe you get some wider press and more wider networks and industry networks start to jump on board and want to tell your story for you. So it's a great public-facing platform to get out what you're doing, not just a way to raise money.
Thank you. That seems an opportune moment to bring in Ruth as our marketing expert. So Ruth, take us through, how would you go about sort of, you know, you've got your crowdfunder page, or you've decided on your new projects and your new avenues of revenue that you're going to try and generate. how do you go about sort of marketing those and getting them out into the world and for people to take notice?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that we've had a lot of conversation already about planning, and I think that's so important. You know, David mentioned SWOT analysis and Max mentioned, you know, your crowdfunding plan. I think that absolutely comes into marketing. It's really important just to take a little bit of time at the beginning of the process to consider what it is you want to do, what are your objectives, what are your aims, you know, what does good look like, what are you trying to get out of this exercise, and think about your audiences as well. So often in marketing, we think about sort of product, place and promotion. So you're thinking about, you know, what is it that I'm promoting, and are there other things that I could be thinking about? You know, can I, as other people have said, can I pivot and can I think about new products that I perhaps haven't considered before? This is a good time for us to be inventive and creative. And, you know, we've already heard about people like Gabby Swallow, who spoke on the performers panel earlier about her musical postcards project. That's a fantastic example of pivoting and creating a new product. And then you think about place. So where am I promoting it? Who is my target audience? And perhaps, again, think out of the box there. You know, COVID means that a lot of the marketing channels and opportunities are different to how they were before. You know, we're all working online. So audiences are changing. You may not be reaching the same local audience that you might have been reaching before. You can be a lot broader in the people that you're talking to. And perhaps you might also want to consider resilient audiences. Who at the moment is more resilient in terms of being kind of open to whatever you're trying to promote to them. So for example, if you're a music teacher and you're looking for new audiences, you might think about, well, who's got a lot of time on their hands right now? You know, perhaps it's professionals who are working from home and have lots of spare time in the evening because they can't go out. You know, maybe they want to re-engage with music and pick up that guitar that's been sitting in the corner of their living room for ages. Or maybe it's retired people who are a little bit more financially comfortable at the moment and have the opportunity to do some music lessons in their spare time. So consider your audiences, think outside the box. And then in terms of promotion, yeah, put together a plan and consider all your different channels. You know, there's so many digital opportunities to promote gigs, to promote teaching practices, to promote, you know, you as a musician, you are the product. That sounds, you know, doesn't sound great to describe a person as a product, but really that is the reality. And you have, as we've already said, so many talents and so many strings to your bow. So think about yourself as the product and then put it out there in your plan. Think about all the different channels you want to use. Where are your strengths? You know, which channels are you comfortable with? As David said, you don't need to use them all. It's good to start with a few that you're comfortable with, but it is also good to put yourself out there across a number of different platforms. So I'd say everybody needs a website these days. It's definitely good to be on social media, but you know, start slowly, start where you feel comfortable. And as David said, again, there's lots of advice out there for you. You know, there are how-to guides. The ISM has its own series of how-to guides that you can access advice from. There are lots of blogs online. David's got a fantastic blog about how to be an online musician. People like the Unsigned Guide have fantastic advice for musicians thinking about marketing and promotion. CD Baby have a great blog series as well. So get online, have a look, do some research and get your plan in order.
Thank you. Lots of top tips there. One thing I did want to pick up on is that in pre-COVID times, we would often talk about how networking is really important to a musician. And I just wondered if between Ruth, David, Max, actually any of the panel, you wanted to pick up on sort of what does networking mean when we're all stuck at home and not really able to go out, and sort of, yeah, how do you approach networking at the moment?
Sure, well, I can start off if you like, and then perhaps pass over to others. But yeah, I think networking is so important for musicians and music professionals. You know, it maybe sounds like a slightly pretentious word, and some people are a bit afraid of networking, but really it's just about connecting and having relationships with other people in the music industry. And we're all networking all the time. I mean, we're networking right now. You know, you guys are networking by interacting, chatting on Slido, chatting on social media. It's a lot easier to do than people think, and it doesn't have to be scary. And it has changed post-COVID. I think, you know, the face-to-face networking opportunities aren't there anymore. We're not, you know, going out and physically meeting people, but there are lots of ways to meet people online through events like the Empowered Musician. You know, there's lots of online events going on and Zoom calls you can join with other musicians and artists. The ISM puts on a webinar series where you can meet other musicians and learn about different topics and chat and ask questions. Social media is also networking, and I would say, yeah, engage with people on social, you know, tag other organisations, respond to people, thank people, be nice on social media. We have a saying in our marketing team, tweet others as you would like to be tweeted. So yeah, always be nice and engage, and just put yourself out there as much as you can. I mean, the worst that can happen is you know, somebody doesn't respond to you, but that really is not all that bad in the grand scheme of things. You know, I think just get out there and remember that everybody started out in the music industry once. You know, even, you know, the big music industry execs, they were starting out in their careers at one time. So I think people are often a lot more approachable and friendly as you might expect. So give it a go.
Fabulous. David, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree more. And it's a theme that I hear constantly whenever I've spoken at any events or various bits and pieces. And one thing I found more and more interesting is the more I speak to people, and the more I speak to people who are further up as well, the more you realise that everyone isn't a massive fan of networking, and everyone kind of finds it a bit hard and awkward. So everyone's in the same collective boat where it's actually something that we all kind of want to support each other through. And it's great to hear Ruth say about using social media. And I reckon around 75% of my connections and work comes from direct messaging people on social media, which seems really surreal, but I find personally for me that format of just sending nice messages that are conversational to people is more beneficial than sending an email proposal that never gets to the right person. And one thing I think is a really good advice for doing it is actually being really genuine and open and trying to meet people who are interesting rather than have an angle per se. And I say that as someone who will reach out when I have an angle. But if you try and do it in a way that is a bit more unique of, I'd love to have a coffee and just hear your thoughts about X, Y, and Z, and great to chat to you at some point. It's amazing the amount of people who will say yes. And sometimes people that you never even think would pick up their phone to you. For me, I think it's such an incredible thing that we can do this and reach people regardless of who they are, wherever they are in the world, with what they have in their pockets. It's just one of these things. I think it's the potential is there for you to take. As one final little thing, networking is a skill that you develop and get better at. So I know that now, after 5 years of deliberately networking, I'm better at it than I was at the beginning. So if you treat it as a skill, it's going to make it less scary. You'll make some potential typos or put the wrong name in at some point, and I definitely have done that more than most people. But by treating it as a skill and a journey, I think that's a more progressive way of looking at it. And hopefully that means that then you've got permission to develop and grow with it.
Sound advice, thank you. Talking of skills, I think that leads us nicely on to one of the other skills that we need to cover in this session, which is thinking about contracts and negotiating, and just sort of how you navigate contracts, particularly in light of COVID and also with Brexit coming up. So at this point, I'd like to bring in John and really ask him to sort of maybe just give us a sense of how you've seen contracts change, or sort of how do you feel contracts are likely to change in future when there are so many things which are a little bit uncertain at the moment. You know, the classic instance is going to be a performer who then, you know, is booked. The promoter has every intention of the gig going ahead, but then something happens and that work could disappear. So sort of how does that play out in contractual terms?
Indeed. Many thanks, Erin, and thanks to Max, David and Ruth for everything that they've said. I think what we're seeing here is there's a world of opportunity out there, which is fantastic, but we need to pay attention to the contractual business elements of that, because we need to make sure that if you're going to enjoy the rewards from your endeavours, that your contract actually allows you to do that. I think one of the things that we've seen through the pandemic, obviously when it hit, there were all these bookings. You gave the example of the performer, Sarah, We dealt with, for example, people who were booked for weddings. Later on in the year, suddenly we weren't sure if they could take place because of lockdowns. As we've seen, the pattern of lockdowns has varied across the 4 nations in the intervening months. So what we were dealing with at the beginning a lot was the claims that contracts had been frustrated. And just very briefly on the legal concept of frustration, effectively it's a mechanism which addresses unforeseen events and what happens in those circumstances. And it happens after a contract has already been formed, so there's a contract in place, something happens that makes it impossible for that contract to be fulfilled. So the effect of all this is that it can end the contract, and legally it would put the parties back into the position as if the contract had never existed. So what does that mean? It means if you had a booking and you'd received a deposit or been paid up front, you may have to pay all that money back because you can't perform the contract. So obviously we were dealing with claims around that. We then have to take into account, well, what does the contract actually say about that? Are there specific clauses that deal with unexpected events? So force majeure is another one of these concepts that comes into play, that addresses, you know, unforeseen events. There's nothing kind of magical about force majeure, and it doesn't have a sort of, there's no English or UK law of force majeure. It's a contractual device, basically. It's about allocating risks between the parties. So they can be good and they can be bad. So I think one of the things that we would need to think about, and I think this is changing the way contracts are being drafted now, is how will people provide for cancellations arising through things like national or regional lockdowns in the future? Who gets to bear the risk? Who takes the hit? Can you balance it? And force majeure clauses might be one way of doing it. There may be other things that can come into play here, like termination clauses, or there might be the contractual ability to vary the contract. So, okay, you've got a date for the future. What happens if you can't do it because there's a lockdown? Do you want to argue frustration of contract or force majeure, or do you want to have a contractual mechanism whereby you as a performer may be able to offer some dates further down the line to the other party? If that's the case, then the contract could still be performed, therefore it's not being frustrated. So there's the possibility that you will get paid and they will get the music that they want for their event. So these are the sorts of things that are beginning to play through, and I think we'll see more of it because people are recognizing that, unlike at the beginning, COVID is kind of here for a while, we think, and the responses to COVID at government level are going to be here for a while. So it will affect contracts. What we need to do is make sure that the contractual mechanisms are going to be as favourable as possible to you as musicians, and I think from that point of view, my general advice would be the advice I always give to people when considering contracts: always get something in writing. Make sure that you take advice on it, particularly in these new areas that Max and David have been talking about. Don't sign anything or agree to anything verbally if you don't understand it. Just be sure you understand what you're getting into, what the effects are, what's going to happen if you have to, if you're faced with, you know, another lockdown, what's going to apply in those circumstances. So you need all that stuff to be written into your contracts. I think the other thing to pay particular attention to in the sort of the opportunity scenarios that David and Max were talking about is, what about your intellectual property? What is it that you're doing in these environments? What rights are involved? So are you creating a recording yourself? There might be rights in that. Are you performing in another recording? You've got performers' rights. Have you written a new piece of music, for example? Have you written some text? Are you supplying images? All of these things have property rights attaching to them that you, as the initial creator, could own. So what's going to happen to them in these contracts? You need to be absolutely clear. Are you assigning them? Are you licensing them? So who will retain ultimately the control over any of these types of copyright work and your intellectual property? We would always want you to maintain your rights over as much as possible, but you will need advice on that. So I think overall, Sarah, I'd say get advice. We are seeing changes. It's about balancing the risks, and is it going to be in your favour? If you're not sure, that means you need to take advice. ISM members can always come and talk to us and the legal team about what they've got and what they want us to look at.
Thank you. You pick up on an interesting point there, because I think as lots of people look at new ways of working, particularly in the digital and online space, it's an area that people might not necessarily be familiar with in terms of rights. There's a perception that it's an incredibly complex area of law, and so can we tease out a little bit more around sort of how do you approach working in an online world?
I think the thing to be aware of at the fundamental level is that the copyright law creates certain rights for you all as creative people. There are certain types of work that are protected under the law, and they're considered to be your own property. It's just called intellectual property, but it's the same idea that if you own a house or a piece of land, it's your property, and if other people want to use it, they need your permission. In the creative industries, this is normally called licensing, so a term that many of you will be familiar with. So what you need to be sure of is what's going to happen to my intellectual property, my copyright works. This could be a piece of music, as I say, it could be a literary work if you write lyrics, it could be a sound recording, if you make your own recordings. If you're a performer, there are certain performers' rights that are treated as property rights in certain circumstances. So all of these things you potentially have control over. What you need to understand is what's going to happen if you have a discussion with somebody who wants to turn your work into, an ebook or something amazing online. What happens? Are they going to be taking the rights off you? The detail will be in the contract. So in terms of how you protect yourself in these online environments, again, it comes down to, if you know your stuff and you're confident in what it says, that's great. But if not, don't struggle with it on your own. Come and talk to us, for example. You need advice, because these things can have long-lasting effects. And if you're not sure of what those effects are, don't sign anything away, because you could be giving up something that will generate a revenue stream for you in the future. You could have just given it to somebody else inadvertently by virtue of a contract that you didn't understand. So again, we come back to what's the core thing in these contractual scenarios. Take advice and make sure you understand it before you commit to anything.
Thank you. Wise words there from John, and certainly the ISM staff team talk a lot to John about these subjects, because he does know an awful lot about them. I want to move over to Kathryn now, because in less than a month, Brexit will have happened. And I'm very keen that we spend some time looking at sort of what this is going to mean for musicians as they think about whether they can work abroad. Obviously, if there's not much work in the UK, one of the logical things is to look at whether there's work abroad. Obviously, traditionally, musicians have crossed over to the continent all the time for whether it's a single gig or whether they're going on tour. But obviously, in a matter of weeks, there are lots of things that are going to change. So perhaps if I could just ask Kathryn to give us a sort of overview of what is changing and what are the sorts of issues that musicians need to be thinking about.
Sure, I'm going to do my best. Obviously, with everything I'm saying, there are technicalities everywhere. So I'm going to do my best to do a brief overview. Obviously, we know that international touring is an essential part of musicians' livelihoods. We know that around 44% of musicians earn up to half their earnings in the EU, and obviously this is before the pandemic happened. First, I'm going to give an overview of how UK musicians can travel to Europe for short-term work. We see different stories on the news every day about Brexit, where one day a deal might be on and then the next day it might be off, but at the moment it's all about fish. However, there are certain things that are going to change no matter what is decided or not at some point this month, and this is because of the end of the freedom of movement. So going to Europe for a visit, which can be up to 90 days in any 180-day period in the Schengen area, requires 6 months validity on your passport. If you're driving, an international driving license, health insurance, because the EHIC will cease, and at the border, being prepared to show a return ticket and evidence of sufficient funds for the length of your stay. Now, working in Europe will require checking each country's regulations on work permits, because each member state is likely to have different conditions for third country nationals, which is what UK nationals will be viewed as. For example, in France, cultural, artistic workers are allowed to come in to work without a permit for up to 90 days. In Switzerland, a permit is not needed for fewer than 8 days of work per year, and in Italy, a work permit is needed for any length of time. So clearly, this is going to make touring extremely complicated. To add to this, some countries, including France, will charge tax on earnings in the country, which means that musicians will be facing some double deductions. There used to be a form called the A1 that prevented this from happening, but so far HMRC have not confirmed if this is going to be replaced with anything equivalent. Now to tell you about travelling with your instruments and equipment. From the start of the year, certain documents will be needed to temporarily transport instruments and professional equipment. This is called an ATA carnet. It certifies that the goods in a list, you have to provide the list, are not being transported for sale, and it needs to be physically stamped going out and coming back. These are already in use for other countries. For example, bands that travel to the States have to get a carnet. The carnet is valid for 1 year, and the cost starts around £350, but it depends on the overall value of the goods that you're transporting, and these can be obtained through the London Chamber of Commerce. If your instrument contains a certain quantity of endangered or protected materials, such as Brazilian rosewood or elephant ivory, another permit will be needed, and this is called a musical instrument certificate. It comes through CITES, which stands for a big mouthful of words, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Again, these certificates already exist and are used to transport animals, plants, and old instruments to and from other countries. The application is free at the moment, but it is a bit cumbersome because the form is the same for transporting a cello as it is for transporting a live animal. Only ports that are set up for CITES inspections can be used to travel with these permits. There are currently 29 of these ports in Great Britain. Unfortunately, this doesn't currently include the Eurostar, and we have had confirmation that CITES checks will be in place between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now I'm going to cover some of the routes available for European musicians coming into the UK for work. So from the 1st of January, they will be viewed as third country nationals. So like Americans or Canadians, they'll be known as non-visa nationals, meaning they don't need a visa to visit and they can stay for up to 6 months at a time. To come in for a one-off work engagement, they can turn up at the UK border with an invitation letter from the organiser, along with documentation that proves themselves as a musician. So this could be a printed off CV, press clippings, promotional material for the event, and also proof that they can financially support themselves during their stay. And this is called a paid permitted engagement, or PPE, and it allows a stay for up to 30 days. For work that lasts up to 3 months, the Tier 5 Creative and Sporting Concession Visa can be obtained by, again, just turning up at the border, armed with even more documentation and a certificate of sponsorship that has to come from the organizer. So this means that the organizer must have applied in advance to become a sponsor. The most important thing is that you do not go through the e-gates, because then your stay is invalid. You have to actually find a border official and say that you're coming for this PPE or Tier 5 concession. The full Tier 5 creative and sporting visa grants a stay of up to 12 months, but this needs to be applied for in advance. It costs around £95. But the caveat for both the Tier 5 visas is that there can only be up to 14 days between engagements, so that might require some extra planning. There's also permit-free festivals, which is a relatively short list of festivals that have been certified to allow international artists to come in just under the visitor route. But of course, all of this is on the basis that gigs even become a normal part of our lives again. So if you're European and you're already in the UK, or you will be here by the end of December, you're eligible to apply for the European Settlement Scheme, which is free and offers a route to settlement and ability to work just as before. And conversely, if you are settled in Europe already, you can apply to stay there. I don't know if that's too much information all at once, and if there's any questions about that. There are certainly more areas I can get into if there's the appetite.
Thank you, Kathryn. I mean, just a huge amount of things to think about there. We have had one question from the audience, which I think we'll take now, if we may, which is, do these arrangements regarding instruments also apply vice versa, i.e. if musicians come over from European countries to the UK?
I believe so. So these, is this asking about the CITES materials? If it is about that, then yes, because of the end of the, because the UK has left the single market, it means that they've exited the customs union, so new customs checks apply both ways.
Good to know. The other question I have for you at this point was whether you have any indication yet, and again, it might draw on your background as a performer, but who is going to be responsible for all these additional costs? Do you envisage that they're likely to have to be shouldered by the musician, or will promoters pick up some of these costs?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, the ISM have been working really hard behind the scenes, lobbying government to try and get some kind of exemptions for these additional costs, because based on what I've said, between the carnets and the health insurance and the only being able to travel through certain ports, if your instrument has these certain protected materials, it will cost hundreds and hundreds of pounds more per year to just be able to have the ability to go. We haven't had a sort of response yet as to that, but organizations will also have higher fees, so they have to register to become a sponsor to issue these certificates, and it costs for every artist you then sponsor. I don't know who's going to pay for it.
One to keep an eye on, I think, and obviously, as Kathryn says, this is an area that the ISM does a lot of lobbying and campaigning on. So, you know, we're always keen to hear about people's experiences. So particularly once we get to January, and assuming that we can actually get to Europe to do any work, you know, please do send through, support our campaigns, and share with us your experiences if you have work that takes place abroad. I want to just pick up, before we've got a couple of audience questions lined up, which I'll save for the very end, but I did just want to go back to John, because throughout all of this, and particularly in relation to contracts, you know, we've been talking about how you can protect yourself, all these new kinds of work, but at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that you get paid. So is there anything that musicians should be doing either at the outset when thinking about signing a contract and taking on an engagement to ensure that, you know, that the engager, the promoter, is going to be good for the money once the service has taken place? And equally, kind of once that has happened, is there anything that people can be doing to ensure that they do get paid?
All right, thank you. I think before entering into any sort of contract, particularly if it's with a startup company or a new kind of tech environment, it's worthwhile doing a bit of due diligence, really. And the internet is a fantastic research tool for these sorts of things. So what you could do is check whether the company is actually registered at Companies House if it's a UK company. So do they have any sort of existing legal status in the UK? Through Companies House, you can have a look at whatever accounts they've filed. They may be subject to an exemption, so it may not get you that far. And ask around. Use the internet, use social media to ask questions. You may find that people have had experiences with them that are wholly positive. You may find that it's a mixed bag, or that people have had lots of negative experiences. So use the tools that you've got at your disposal to research as much as you can. I think the next stage obviously is getting advice on, well, what are the terms of the contract that are being offered. Obviously you don't want anything in the contract that says that they can't pay you, because why would you ever agree to that? But it's worthwhile looking over, getting the contract looked at to make sure that there isn't anything that says that they have the contractual right to defer payment or to part pay, anything like that. You do not want anything in your contracts that gives them that right. So if anything looks like it might have that sort of flavour about it, get it checked out. In terms of at the other end, even if the contract's absolutely fine, we are in difficult times. Even established commercial entities are struggling and indeed going bust in some cases. So what can you do? Something that you might want to consider is whether or not there is any insurance available to you to protect you in the event of liquidations and so on and so forth. COVID is now a sort of known entity, so insurers are likely to try and exclude it, but it is possible. You may find that there are insurances available that would help you. They just might be more expensive than they were before because of the high level of risk. Depending on what the situation with the company is, you may be considered a creditor of the company if they've gone into liquidation, but you may be a long way down the list. And you may find that there's not much chance of getting that money back. So I think if upfront, make sure there's nothing that gives them the ability to defer or delay payment at all. And at the other end, insure if you can. But if something does go bust, companies do go bust, and there may be nothing that you can do about it, or there's maybe limits to what you can actually achieve.
Thank you. Lots of sound advice in there. That's really helpful, thank you. In the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I just want to bring in some of the audience questions, because we've got quite a few lining up. So I'm going to go back to the ones that were asked midway through the session. And maybe if I could ask Ruth and David in particular to think about this one. So the question is, social media is great, but it's really difficult to find the time to post effectively. Are there any platforms in particular I should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I know social media can be a bit daunting. And as we said earlier, you might not be comfortable on every platform. So I think, as we said, focus on the ones that you're comfortable with, but also think about where your audience is. So consider, you know, what's your following like on each of those platforms. If you already have a substantial following, it's probably a good idea to focus on that platform. So if you already have lots of Facebook followers, for example, it's probably a good idea to put your efforts there. You can also look at insights. Most social media platforms offer the chance to look at your insights, find out more about your audience. Where are they? Who are they? What age are they? So you can kind of use that data in your planning and decide where you want to focus your efforts. I think also you don't need to be posting all the time. You can post maybe once a day, particularly on Facebook. There's no need to do multiple posts per day. You know, you can post as much as you like on Twitter, but for Facebook and Instagram, keep it kind of to 1 or 2 posts a day is absolutely fine. So really consider what you're comfortable with, where your audience is, and the age of your audience as well. I mean, you probably don't need to think about TikTok if you're marketing your music or your teaching practice to people over the age of 50, for example. But if you're marketing your music at people under the age of 20, then TikTok is probably a good idea. And TikTok's somewhere you can have a lot of fun and be really creative. So it depends on you and your personality as well. You know, if you're really creative and you really enjoy coming up with fun videos, then go for TikTok. But if you're someone who wants to just use that platform as a place to promote events, then it might be better to go for Facebook. Or if you're using it to engage with organisations, then Twitter's a good place to do that. So yeah, think about what you're aiming for, who your audience is, and what you're comfortable with.
A couple of little extra things that may help with all those. I totally agree with absolutely everything that Ruth just said. It may also be worth investigating a social media management tool, which is something that means you can schedule things all from one platform. So Hootsuite and Buffer are very good and have free versions. And with those, you can have your Instagram and Facebook and Twitter accounts and everything in the same place. The benefits of doing that means you can schedule things as much in advance as you want, which takes the stress off, and I'll get back to that in a second. Also, hypothetically, you can tell that same post to go to every single platform. And in an ideal world, it's best to have content that's sort of created especially for Facebook and especially for Instagram and especially for Twitter. But it's not the end of the world if they all do happen to be the same on every platform. So if that's what gets you started and gets you going and makes it an easier process, then I definitely recommend it. But going back to the scheduling, in times where I'm busy or times when I deliberately disconnect from social media just to give myself some headspace, I will allocate myself a social media time as if it'll be like doing practice time, and either have 30 minutes at the beginning of the week or 10 minutes a day or something. And we'll have that as sort of a time where I'll sit down, I'll write my content for the week, schedule it all out, and then just not touch it and not look at it. And it will give the impression that I'm there constantly during that time. But in essence, it's just been a 30-minute slot of my week where I've got all my headspace out and I'm then going to ignore it. But if you do tweet me, I am going to get back to your tweets instantly, I promise.
Good. Okay, thank you. Following on from that, another question we've had is, in a time when lots of us are struggling financially, where can we make the best career investment? Equipment, tech, marketing, coaching? What would you recommend? David, maybe that's one for you.
I was just about to say, can I jump back in on it? I don't know whose quote it is, but it's something from the camera world, and it's the best camera is the one you have. Absolutely exhaust everything on your phone. There's no need to go out and start purchasing big expensive equipment. And I do content creation for various different things and do have some fancy gadgets, but more and more I'm using my phone just for convenience, and it's amazing what they can create, both visually, audibly, anything on it. So for me, experiment with what you have and what you have for free, and only when you really realize something you cannot do, then start to invest in the tech. There's so many incredible apps that can help you. Moment for photography is exceptionally good. Snapseed for editing photos and things. There's also some free video editing software that you can get as apps as well. So there's so many things there that can really help you to start getting going with those. So I'm a huge believer in just using phones nowadays to go forward, especially as for someone who has all the gadgets and will spend time arguing with all the settings that goes with them. The ease of just hitting record, if you're not someone who's technically savvy or don't want that extra level of stress in recording, is huge. So I'd really recommend in not investing in equipment until you desperately need to. Then what were the other options? I think coaching was one of them, marketing. I think potentially marketing, if you think it's something that's going to get you going, it's very easy to spend marketing budgets quickly without it being effective. So for example, either spending money on adverts on Facebook when you just put something that's content that's not very exciting and hit boost and money just disappears, or if you're buying print advertising. So I'd only really spend money on marketing when it's something you know is going to be beneficial. That's probably an entire seminar session and conference in itself. Potentially something along the lines of coaching, I think might be quite an interesting one if it's going to be skills that help you going forwards, and something that you can, if you feel there's a good finite element there. But again, going back to the idea of existing everything you have already, I'd completely try and exhaust Google first. And if you don't find that process overwhelming and you're excited about research, do that. But again, there's nothing wrong with them reaching out for help and asking where needs be.
Yeah, I would totally agree with David there. I think invest in time rather than in equipment, particularly with marketing and promotion. There's so much you can do for free, whether it's building a website, starting a mailing list, social media, streaming platforms. You can get a lot of your stuff out there for free, and there's so much advice online. The ISM has lots of advice on marketing and promotion in our advice centre. So do that research, look at the advice, and invest your time in planning it properly.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move back to sort of Brexit and contracts, because we've got a number of questions coming in on that. So back to sort of Kathryn and John. So first up is one for Kathryn, with someone asking whether the regulations and the situation that applies for EU nationals, where do people from the Republic of Ireland stand? Are they counted as EU citizens? Obviously, there's a special relationship between the UK and Ireland. What happens if you're...
So the Republic of Ireland remains in the common travel area. So the policy is that Brexit will not affect Republic of Ireland nationals at all.
Right.
Which is good.
That feels like a slight bit of positive news. And the other question on Brexit at the moment is a duo touring in Europe next year. One is European and the other performer is British. Could the payment and contracts go through the European?
Well, I think that's a little bit technical. A little bit specific. I'd have to sort of know, I think, who arranged the performance. So it depends if that went through an agent and what and where they are based. So it really just depends on who has gotten the work to happen. I don't know if John maybe has a little bit more about that, but it depends on who's gotten the work and where they're based and what kind of tax might be applied to it, I think.
Absolutely, Kathryn. I think it's a broad question. We'd need to know more detail to be able to answer it, with any justification. But yes, absolutely. Who's the promoter? Who's the engager? Where are they located? What are there any issues affecting contracting, non-European Union nationals? We don't know, but it's something to think about. In terms of the payment, again, it's if it's a European promoter or engager, if it's a European Union national, then potentially yes, the payments could be routed through there. But it depends what the contract says as well. So is it a joint contract? Are they two individual contracts? It's a duo, so it's probably going to be one. What's the relationship between the members of the duo? That's something to think about as well. So all things are possible, but we would probably need to know a little bit more about the actual facts to give a comprehensive answer. So sorry if we haven't answered that fully, but if you want to get in touch with us subsequently, we'll do what we can to help.
Thank you. John, another question for you, and I'm aware we've got 2.5 minutes left, so we're going to keep this one brief. But is it acceptable to ask for payment up front, or at least a deposit? Okay, well, if we take the question to be in relation to a gig or a live performance of some description, or a wedding or whatever, yes, absolutely. It's just a question of whether or not you can negotiate one. There's no reason why not. It's probably a good idea, because again, it sort of balances the risks between you and the other party. Bear in mind that if the performance can't go ahead, if the contract itself cannot be performed because of another lockdown or something, then what's the situation? Is the contract frustrated? In which case you may have to pay that deposit back. On the other hand, if you've incurred costs, you may be able to keep them and justify them. Or do you have something in your contract that says this is what's going to happen in the event of a further lockdown? So this is something which I would urge you to start thinking about, so that you know what the arrangements are in advance. But yes, you can certainly ask. Right, okay, we've got 2 last questions which I'm really going to try and see if we can squeeze in. So the first one is, what should I do if a promoter refuses to pay me because he has had to cancel the gig and there was no physical contract? Okay, I think one of the questions you'd have to look at
is there a chain of correspondence? Are there emails that say what's going to happen in these circumstances? If they don't pay you, but you can prove that there is some sort of arrangement between you, then we can try and recover the money for you. If you're an ISM member, you may be able to take something through the small claims court, depending on the value of the claim. Really, your life will be so much easier if you do get your contracts in writing, even if it's just an exchange of emails to begin with. But if it comes down to your word against the other parties, because there's no written evidence at all, you're just going to have to take your chances. The courts can uphold verbal contracts, but it's a question of the evidence. How can you prove that that agreement was ever reached verbally? So get something in writing. That would be my advice to you for the future.
Fantastic. I'm afraid we've run out of time for the very last question. But I just want to say a huge thank you to the panel. Lots of topics that we've covered. Thank you equally to our audience for all the questions, and stay tuned for the final address from Deborah Annette. Thank you very much.